from day 25 to day 28, we'll work on the notion of team building, rules, the usefulness of feedback, and what makes feedback critical in the development of your project. As you're finishing your first story, you may want to write another already. And this training you've received may entice you to start a larger project, a bolder project maybe, a greater project on your second book, third book, fourth. Same applies for stories, a series of games, or an animated series. You may want now to develop something larger than one book. And in order to do so, you'll need to gather a team. Each of your teammates will have different roles and different functions. And we'll apply the logic we've established in this course of functions and role to team building in order for you to understand the different archetypes of team members. In order to find why your projections are working or not, what you can change about them in order to ameliorate them, you'll want to receive a form of feedback. And part of this feedback, and in fact, probably the most useful part of this feedback, will come from your team. If you're writing a story with multiple people, you'll have the advantage of having a diversity of perspectives. However, feedback is not limited to your teammates only, and you'll want to receive feedback from your public. It is the other main kind of feedback. So you want to have inner feedback coming from your team, and outer feedback coming from your public. And in order to estimate if this feedback is useful, we'll present you a set of questions, a set of themes you'll want to question your public about, or your public may want to ask you questions about these themes, these topics, since they are the most important in your story. Feedback needs to be focused. Feedback needs to be specific, and it is what will make it most useful. This and implementability. Projects have up to 4 innate dimensions. The first one's narrative, or what we'll traditionally call story. The second is sound, and in terms of sound, we'll most of the time consider music. The third is graphics and imagery. And the fourth one is programming. Now, when it comes to programming, in this episode, we'll take a broader definition, the broader definition, and we're not limiting ourselves to coding here. The narrative dimension may be considered the foremost dimension of stories, since if you don't have a narrative, you don't have a story. Now, what's a narrative, and what's the narrative dimension of a story? Narrative here, and we'll have a definition that's slightly different from what you might traditionally find, will be defined by choices and by interaction. Most of our work, in terms of character relationship, in terms of characters' dialogues, character description, choices from the character's origins and character's evolution, is defined by a balance. A balance between determinism and free will. Every character is free in the limits of their own determinism. So characters are defined by their choices, the coherence of characters' actions, the consistency of characters' behavior, and characters' evolution as a whole is defined by choices. And characters are also defined by their interactions with each other and their interaction with the world, with the environments, with organizations. So that's our 2 main dimensions. Now, how do they translate in terms of sound? Now, sound, and you'll have a designated member of your team which is more competent in terms of sound than the other team member, but everyone will want to participate on each of these dimensions. Everyone will want to participate in the narrative, everyone will want to participate in sound, everyone for graphics, and everyone in programming. But just to different degrees of proficiency and to different degrees of interest. Now, for example, the team member in charge of sound will be maybe most comfortable with making music. Maybe she will be a musician. Maybe she will be more comfortable into creating effects and atmosphere sound, background sound, background music. Maybe she will be more comfortable with voice acting as well. Now, eventually, you'll all want to play a certain type of character, so you can do the dub yourself. Because, who would be better suited to dub your characters than you? So if you may learn how to do voice acting, and that's where diversity matters a lot, you may want to be able to produce different types of voices. And in order to broaden your range of options, the team member in charge of sound, the lead sound member, may be able to modulate these sounds, modulate these voices in order to give you more options. Same idea when it comes to graphics, really. The member in charge of graphics, the member which is mainly in charge of graphics. And again, with each new project, you want to change the lead member of the project. But you may also want to change the member in each of the section which is in charge of the due section. For example, in your first project, it may be your member C, which is in charge of the graphics. But then in the next story, member B, which is normally in charge of sound, is more attached to the themes, is more interested in this new story and wants to be in charge of the graphics as well. So they may cooperate more. You may also play on the creation of pairs. For example, pair graphics and sound for a specific series. If you have 6 episodes, and if the member in charge of graphics and sound are really friendly towards one another and also really interested in this series, they may want to be in charge of the project of these 6 episodes of the project, and they may be in charge of their role first and foremost, because that's their function in this project. But they may also want to suggest how the 2 other members, so member in charge of narrative and member in charge of programming, execute their decisions. They may take the main decisions for the project. They may ensure their own function, and they may also give directives to the 2 other members of the team. So that's how you can organize yourself. And when it comes to the last part, if you want to scale your work, if you want to turn your books into movies, for example, and movies really here is just the cinematographic dimension. It doesn't really mean that you're putting any kind of duration on your work. We're not necessarily talking about 60-minute movies or 90-minute movies. It can be just 5-minute episodes, and you're creating a series now. You're creating a series, 5-minute episodes or even 2-minute episodes, and you may want to add the programming dimension to your work. Here, programming means coding. It means coding, but it doesn't only mean coding. Programming means 2 things here: efficiency and experimentation. Programming is playing. You try something, it breaks. It doesn't work, so you want to try something else. Programming is really problem solving here, more than any other dimension, since it's the function which will be the most limited by technology. So programming here is efficiency, and programming here is playing. Now the members in charge of graphics and the member in charge of programming may want to try animation. Especially with the rise of procedural generated animation, you may want to try your hand at animation, because it will become easier. It will just become easier. You may have soon the ability to generate, well, you already have the ability to generate procedurally environment, you have the ability to generate procedurally props, buildings, objects. You'll have the ability to generate procedurally characters, not necessarily your main characters that you may want to uncraft, or your secondary character that you may want to uncraft as well, but tertiary characters. You may want to procedurally generate them, and it will allow you to create movies, true fully fledged animations, again, wherever the length. So that's it for our functions part. Now let's get to our roles part. In order to create each of your projects, you'll need to fulfill roles. Now, contrary to function, which were one person, one function most of the time, or at least one function, one leading individual, one leading team member, roles will be a lot more flexible. Roles are more about creating an intention than giving someone a task or a set of tasks. Each of the roles presented here, each of the 4 roles presented here, will often be shared between multiple team members. The story is the first dimension you'll want to consider when it comes to creating your project. And by first here, we don't mean the most important, just the first, chronologically. What defines the story now? The story is defined by change. The story is meant to move, to advance. The story is meant to provoke change, advancement, disruption. And that's why the 3 most important parts of the story are the crisis, because the crisis causes the most perturbation. Now, which kind of role would suit this? Which kind of individual would suit this the most? Well, we presented you the rival archetype. Now, why would you want to impersonate a rival type of character when it comes to writing your story? Most stories are written by their inner functioning. Some stories are written by other stories functioning, but most stories are written by their inner functioning. And if you want to expand on that, stories are written by conflicts. Now, if you want to say it in a more prosaic way, conflicts are what make the story advance. So, getting a sense of being adversarial, getting a sense of being contrarian to some degree, will allow you to impersonate a storyteller. A storyteller is more of an antagonist, actually, to the characters she created than she's a supporter. But she's a very defined kind of antagonist. She's not the antagonist which wants to make them disappear. She's the antagonist which wants them to thrive, to bloom, to develop themselves, to grow. And that's why the nature of the rival is most adapted here in order to create the story. So now, what does it mean in terms of team member? It means that when you're creating your story, each of your team members want to impersonate a rival type of character. Now, we've seen before that rivals are not uniform. There are multiple types of rival. Again, because a rival is reckless and a rival is relentless. So that's just 2 parts, When you're writing your story, you want to be relentless. You'll be reckless sometime, you'll make some mistakes, but that's not a problem because you're continuing, you're pushing, you're trying, you're testing. That's what a rival is. And that's why you want to be a rival as a storyteller. Now, same logic. Who would be the most appropriate to create a world? Well, to create your world, you want to develop a sense of discovery. You want to be motivated by discovering new things, trying new things, finding new things, and you already got a role for that. It's the same thing when you're creating your world. You want to impersonate an enticer type of character, an adventurer type of character, a character who wants to try new things, see new things, discover new things. A character which wants to give the public and the characters new perspectives on the world. No, maybe there's a world below that we've never seen before. Maybe there's a world above that we've never seen before. Maybe there are other planets that we can explore them, but we can imagine what's on them, and by imagining what's on these other planets, we can imagine why we're here now, why we're born on this planet. So that's our enticer. As you're developing your world, you want to be enticed by it. You want to, become a child again. You want to enjoy every new bit of discovery, and you want your public and your character to enjoy every bit of discovery. Following the logic. If you want to establish proper relationships, you have to develop a great sense of empathy. You want to develop a great sense of satisfaction when it comes to developing your characters. Now, you know that your characters are creating relationships because they want to reach a certain outcome. Now, certain relationships are created forcefully, of course, because we develop enemies, we develop opponents, antagonists. So, are all these antagonists problematic, or are they all problematic to the same degree? Probably not. Maybe some antagonists are just opponents in a specific crisis, in a specific moment. Other will become enemies in the long run, and other may become friends or just allies. And that's why you want to develop a high degree of empathy when it comes to creating relationship. And there's a role for that. This role, which is, again, completely motivated by satisfaction, is the role in which empathy is the most prevalent. The ability to develop empathy here, again, empathy is just a tool. It's a tool of analysis. It's a tool which allows you to understand the characters, to understand why will satisfy them and why they're doing what they're doing. Because any character, every character has a goal. Every character has a goal, and every character has a motivation. Since every character has an identity, so it's the goal, and has a motivation, it's the role. Each character needs to be able to express clearly this mean of satisfaction, or the thing that will allow them to achieve satisfaction, because it's just a matter. This is just a matter of clarity. Your characters need to be able to express their goal. They need to be able to express their motivation, even if they never express it directly. Even if they never directly say it, they need to be able to display their goal. And that's where the advisor state of mind, the advisor mentality, is particularly useful to create relationships. Building our relationships from character to character and from characters to environment will allow you to access the last dimension of our necessary roles. And this last dimension is attachment. Now, attachment may be considered the most human part of the story. It's the most important part of your stories, of your projects, of your products, because it's what links your humans, characters, public, team members, and yourself to these projects. That's attachment by the creation of symbols, by the creation of icons, by the creation of imagery to follow, which will allow you to develop a sustainability. Now, if attachment is the most human part of our roles, is the most human part of our project, why attribute it to the least human role in our set of roles. Well, we'll build the following principle on a paradox. And now this paradox, as it may appear to you right now, will become progressively a synergy as you write your stories. It's a paradox based, and again, we'll call it a paradox for now, but it will be seen as a synergy as you experiment all the principles in this course. On the principle, which is the motivation of the arbiter, the principle of closure. Now, closure is a word we've used before in order to define the motivation set of the arbiter. Now, let's see how it relates to the other three kinds of motivation. Let's see the relationship between closure and change first. What is change? Change is the inherent nature of all the worlds you create, all the stories you create, all the characters you create, all the environments you created are subject to change, wherever it's an inner change or it's a change which is received from the exterior, from the outer dimension of the character. Now, how does that relate to closure? Well, the arbiter, again, is a character which observes. The character observes and tries to balance the different dimensions of your stories, the different dimensions of your world, the different dimensions of your relationships. So, by observing change and by trying to balance change in order to change to be sustainable in the long run, she has to take into account story, worlds, and relationship. Or differently, story, worlds, and character. Now, how does that relate to discovery? Well, in order to apply the closure principle, the arbiter needs to gather the most information. The character, which we'll hear, will be a hood, a large shelter, let's say, yes, because each of these worlds are, in a sense, a home for your characters, because they're not characters per se, they're homes in which you will shelter your characters. So the arbiter shelter needs to be populated by characters which are looking for diversity, which are looking for disruption, which are looking for change, which are looking for new elements in order to pass their judgment. Since their judgment needs to be encompassing, since their judgment needs to be global, open on the world, but closed in their mind. So, the arbiter type of character, the arbiter types of character, which is a mantle you all want to wear when you're working on attachment, must be worn. And the role of arbiter must be practiced by taking into account new element, disruption, diverse element, and to some degree, even if precedently we considered that it wasn't the role of the arbiter, and it's not the role of the arbiter, it's the role of the advisor, satisfaction. Now, satisfaction must be balanced with discovery and change in order to come to closure. So you may consider, and that will be the summary of all this, that closure is the mean through which you want to go, but closure is also the mean of all the other three motivations. Closure is the mean of change, plus discovery, plus satisfaction. So it is the medium through which you want to go in order to create attachment, but it is also the medium of change, discovery, and satisfaction. Here's how roles should be interpreted in contrast to functions. In terms of functions, to each function, one member of the team, one team member will correspond to each function. You'll have at least one leading member for each function. You have one member for the narrative, you have one leading member for the sound, one leading member for the graphics, and one leading member for the programming. Or at least one, because here in this example we are functioning with a team of 4 characters. But if your team has more than 4 people, you just have to allocate, 2, for example, or so on in regards to the needs of your project. When it comes to roles, each aspect of your project, each role associated with your project will engage all your team members. All your team members will be engaged in the story. All your team members will be engaged in the world creation. All your team members will be engaged in relationships and character, and all your team members will be engaged in attachment. And now, through all of these, you'll have your 4 function-related dimensions to verify. For story, you'll have the narrative, you have the sound, you have the graphics, and you have the programming. For world, you have the narrative, you have the sound, you have the graphics, you have the programming, and so on.